Good evening, everybody. I'm Bill Maley, Brighton Town Supervisor, and I'm pleased to welcome you all here to tonight's special Town Board Workshop meeting. Those of you that are here on a regular basis know this is a little bit different setup than we usually have. We'd usually be up there. But tonight, really, the focus is going to be on the screen and the opportunity at this workshop for the public to view materials presented by the applicant, the Daniele family companies, and for the town board to view as well and to ask questions. Now, I do want to note that tonight is not a town board public hearing. The next public hearing on this matter will be a week from tomorrow, next Wednesday night, May 10th at 7 p.m. That will be a public hearing on the supplemental draft environmental impact statement for this project. But tonight, we're going to be reviewing a presentation by the developer of this proposed project. You'll be seeing, and I think the developer representatives will get a little bit more into exactly what we have, but we're going to be viewing a simulation and I believe probably some drone video as well. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. I'm going to ask for a motion to approve tonight's agenda, and the only item on the agenda is this Synchro traffic model viewing. So can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Dan, please call the roll.
Councilmember Novros?
Aye.
Councilmember DePonzio?
Aye.
Councilmember Werner?
Aye.
Supervisor Manley?
Aye. Now, I want to ask that everybody stand for the pledge to the flag, and I'm going to ask Councilmember DePonzio to lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jason. I do want to note that if you hear the town's emergency alarm system activated, please leave the room immediately. Now, you can exit this room either through the door over there marked with the exit sign. If you leave by that door, turn right, go down the stairs, out the back door to Town Hall, and move away from the building. Or you can leave through either of the two double doors here at the back of the room, go through the lobby, out the front door of Town Hall, down the stairs, and away from the building. Obviously, we don't anticipate that, but just for your protection and ours. So now we're going to begin this workshop. And again, I want to stress, tonight is not a public hearing. Tonight will be an opportunity for all of us to view this synchronization simulation, but it is not a public hearing. The town board will be engaging with, asking questions of the applicant and their representatives who will be making the presentation tonight. And I want to encourage members of the public to view, and we will be making this available on our YouTube channel, just like we do all of our other town board meetings for your future viewing. If you have questions or thoughts as you watch this, I encourage you to either attend the public hearing next Wednesday night, May 10th, 7 o'clock, right here in this room. There will also be opportunity for written comments on the supplemental draft environmental impact statement. The written comment period will close at the end of business 5 p.m. on Monday, May 22nd. So right now I'm going to turn the program over to the developer and one or more of their representatives. Go right ahead.
All right, well, good evening. My name is Jess Sudol. I'm Vice President with Passero Associates. We're a local civil engineering firm. With me here also this evening is Amy Dake from SRF and Associates. They are the traffic engineers. Also Mr. Jerry Goldman, counsel for the applicant, as well as the applicant himself, Mr. Anthony Daniele, and also in the crowd, Danny Daniele and Mario Daniele. First off, I want to thank the town board for this opportunity to present our project as it relates to the supplemental draft environmental impact statement, and primarily focused on traffic. The intent this evening, as you said, Mr. Supervisor, is for this to be an interactive presentation. I do have an agenda that I'd like to get through. I believe as I work through the agenda, perhaps some of your questions will be answered later on, but by all means, if you do have a question as we're going through this, please feel free to speak up. We do have a combination of videos of the existing traffic conditions along Monroe Avenue, and we also have a series of simulations using the computer software for traffic. So that's going to kind of be the way that we address the presentation. The actual simulation in terms of the sim traffic model does allow us to zoom in and go around. So, if we're zoomed in on the intersection of Clover and Monroe, and you want to go up and see what's happening at Westfall, we certainly have, the ability to do that. So feel free to ask those type of questions. I think in order for everyone to adequately see the presentation and see the simulation, I think we are going to turn the lights off.
That's correct.
So at this point, if we want to kill the lights, let everyone take a moment here to get adjusted. So this really goes back to 2016, nearly a year ago, when the original draft environmental impact statement, or the DEIS, was submitted with a traffic impact study. Shortly after that, there was several public hearings, and there was also a comment period, in which point the New York State DOT had some comments on the traffic study. There was a little bit of flurry of confusion at that point, because there was started to be comments like, well, the applicant's traffic study doesn't match what's really going on out there, and the applicant's traffic study is wrong. And there's a very good reason for that, and the reason for that is that back in 2016, up until August of 2016, the corridor was not functioning as it was designed to function. Specifically, the intersection of Clover Street and Monroe Avenue did not have the proper signal timing and was not giving the proper green time to people traveling eastbound on Monroe Avenue. Now, eastbound would be from that 590 down towards Wegmans. So as a result of that, there was significantly more congestion than there was ever intended to be, and certainly I believe that led to a lot of the perception that there was this gridlock or this unbearable congestion in the corridor right in front of our project. So we spent some time going back trying to figure out what exactly was going on, and that's when we uncovered this discrepancy in this malfunctioning signal. Shortly after that, we started to work with DOT and Stantec, the town's consultants, to try to determine exactly what was going on and how best to move forward. So with that said, that's just a little bit of background, and that actual discrepancy was the trigger for the preparation of the SDEIS. So because the DOT had actually provided us signal timings to use in the initial traffic study, but those were actually different than what was actually happening out there in real life. So even though they said, here, use these signal timings, and we did, they came back and said, well, they don't match what's out there in real life, and the reason for that is because what was out there in real life was a malfunctioning signal. So shortly after that, the town board did pass a resolution requiring a supplemental draft environmental impact statement to address that discrepancy and also to update the traffic study. So what I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to jump to the punchline and show you what the worst case condition looks like, which is the afternoon PM peak hour, just to kind of show you where we're headed. And then I want to kind of systematically take you through how we got there. And the way that we do that is we all have to agree on, all right, what is the existing condition, really what's out there. Then we have to make sure that our model, our sim traffic model, is accurately depicting that. Once we can all agree on the existing baseline conditions, which was really the crux, about a year ago, then we can move forward with actual site plan modifications. Then we can start to look at things like what are the actual projections, how many cars would the Whole Foods Plaza generate. Then we look at things like mitigation, and then ultimately we're going to circle all the way back around to this model. What this model represents, again, is the worst case scenario. It also represents a fully improved corridor with all of our proposed mitigation, including traffic signal, traffic coordination, and things like that. Just to put it in perspective for everybody, here's Monroe Avenue. This is Clover Street. These are the cars here. Again, we can zoom in on this a little bit closer so you can see them.
I was going to ask you to do that, Jess. I think it's still
You can.
difficult.
Why don't you go, Amy, right to the... So this is our proposed entrance that comes into the Whole Food Plaza. This is a proposed signal light, which we'll talk about in more depth. And then this is our second entrance out, which is a right out onto Monroe Avenue and also a left in. So this is showing you how the traffic will actually work once this plaza is built. So before you just say, all right, meeting over, I'll take your word for it, let's kind of go through how we got there. So again, it all goes back to this malfunctioning signal timing. And I want to talk about what that really means. And Amy, we have a video from August 18th of 2016 of what it actually looked like. Just make sure you grab the movie file there, not necessarily the image. So this is back in August 18th of 2016. We are starting to see some backup in this corridor. At this point, we have a malfunctioning traffic signal that is only providing 40 seconds of eastbound green time. So these folks here are only going to get 40 seconds. And what that leads to is ultimately this backup. And the reason for that is that it only allows about 40 cars to get through that movement of the intersection. What I'll talk about a little bit later, when you actually use the correct signal timing, you get closer to 63 to 65 cars are able to get through that intersection. And that's just in 1 2-minute cycle, actually a minute and a half in this case. When you apply that 20 cars per cycle that aren't able to move through here, the result is it accumulates. 20 cars this time, 20 cars next cycle, 20 cars next cycle. So it results in 800 cars during the actual peak hour that are not able to move through this corridor, and 800 cars is a lot. Do you have a question, Mr. Supervisor?
I did. I just wanted to clarify when you say about 40 as opposed to 63, which are you talking about just the eastbound movement on Monroe Avenue?
Yes, sir. Just the eastbound movement.
Okay.
And Jeff, while we're there, how many seconds was it in? Jess?
Jess.
Excuse me, Jess.
It was originally intended to be close to over 60 seconds. And what happened back in August is the DOT didn't want to just go from 40 and ramp right up to where it was. They began to systematically calibrate it. So, every week or so, they'd add some more green time, and then monitor the intersection to see what works best. Finally, settling on a green time of approximately 57.5 seconds, which is where it should be, and where it is in some of these other videos we'll take a look at. But Amy, if you don't mind, could you go to about 220 on the actual down here? I want to show you guys something that kind of speaks to what the issue is. So here, you have no cars moving, no cars on Clover Street. Normally, this should already be green. So this whole intersection is just stopped dead. I mean, this is not paused. And then they finally start to move. So these guys were shortchanged all that time when there was nobody on Clover Street, which just speaks to not only was the timing malfunctioning, but also the sensor loops weren't working properly, and they also had some issue with the PED buttons, where the PED button would get stuck, so the intersection constantly thinks somebody's trying to cross the street, and so all these things, kind of accumulated into this issue. Now look, those 20 cars add up, the 20 cars add up, they add up, they add up. And this impact can be felt all the way up past Westfall, all the way up the corridor, because again, there's that accumulating factor that goes with it. So that was really what we were dealing with last year. So then shortly after, like I said, the DOT started to say, okay, let's add some more time, and let's get to a point where we say this is the appropriate signal timing, because from that point, the DOT could then give that to Amy and her team and say, use this signal timing, that's what's actually out in the field, that's what it should be, and that's how they got to the 57.5 seconds. So that really occurred right around early September, so not too far after this. So if you go to the September 6th video, now this is only a couple weeks after. Traffic conditions have not changed substantially. There's no significant development or anything taking place. It's essentially, and this happens at the same time, which happens to be 518 is really the peak of peaks. So now when I pull this up, people are going to say, you're out of your mind. I mean, where are all those cars that used to be here? Well, it's because you don't have that accumulating factor. Those extra 20 to 25 cars each cycle get through this intersection. So this thing really has the ability to flush out every time and flush out and flush out and create all of this storage for the next wave to come on through. And if you go to the 7-minute mark, and as she's flying through it, you can see it does not, if you look up here, I don't know how well you can see it, but 590 is completely backed up, just like it usually is at 515. I mean, it's just more evidence that we're looking at the time period. But this intersection here continues to flow through at a far more reasonable rate than what it was when the signals weren't right. So I'm not necessarily trying to persuade anybody with this. I'm just trying to show simply the fact between this is what it looked like with 40 seconds This is what it looks like at 57.5. We're not even talking about, our project yet. I'm just trying to demonstrate the impact of what a proper actuated signal will do when it's operating as designed. So now we have a 57.5 second green time. We have signal timings that we can agree to. That information was then provided to Amy, who with her and her team could update the model.
Jess,
Yes.
can I just ask, I believe, I know the August date, obviously, but I think September 6th was still before the first day of school, at least for the Brighton Central School
thank you for
District.
that. That's kind of where I was going next. The last actual study time that we could have that was comparable was towards the beginning of November. So if you pull up November 1st, the reason why I say that is because daylight savings time this year, for those of you who remembered, was on November 6th, which was a Sunday. So when you back up from that Sunday, and after daylight saving times, this is all dark. And all you see is lights, and it's very hard to understand what's going on. So even when you go to November 1st, which is, see that car getting stuck there? We'll talk about that later. But, similar time, you don't have the holiday in play, similar conditions. You do get a queue. We're not refuting that people don't queue up, and we're going to talk about queues in a bit. But again, if you go to, actually right here, we can leave it. It's tough to see, but 590, again, you're starting to get the backup condition. But this is, full 2 months later, same green time, that 57.5 second green time, you're still getting similar results with, this eastbound time releases. This queue is allowed to flush out. Meanwhile, people are starting to backfill here. I know this one's a little bit darker because it was getting darker in the year, but people are starting to backfill in that corridor. So yes, we did go back and take a look at, what other time period could we look at when we're further into the school year, we're getting further into the holiday season, and the most appropriate case study for us was that November 1st time period, which is why we looked at it. After this, the lights kind of go off, no pun intended. So again, 66, I actually sat there and I counted every single one of these cars, and there's anywhere between 63 and 65 cars are able to make it through there, as opposed to only 38 to 40 with the alternate signal timing. So what SRF did was we went and they plugged this information back into the model. But it didn't stop there. That was only the beginning. Then went back and did additional counts just to say, hey, let's make sure that traffic study that we first started several years ago is still accurate, and actually went out here and counted the amount of cars that are in both directions just to verify that, in fact, the numbers were still accurate, which they were. Then we started to measure the queue lengths to say, what we want to do is make sure that this model, this complicated computer software, is accurately representing actual field conditions. We don't want there to be a glitch in the model so that it's not an accurate depiction of what we're actually dealing with. So the way that we do that is we look at the queue that's measured and shown in the traffic simulation, and we're about to get all into traffic simulations. And then we actually went out here, and Amy herself actually went out and counted and said, okay, over the course of time, how long is the queue? How long is the queue? How long is the queue? And is that consistent with what our model is showing us? And then all this information is shared back with the town's consultants, it's shared with the state DOT to say, okay, yes, you guys are looking at the right thing. Yes, you're doing this correctly. Yes, your settings in your traffic software are accurate. This went through the actual computer analysis went through a very thorough vetting by the town's traffic consultant to make sure that every single parameter, every single thing you could possibly imagine was exactly the way that they wanted it. And as I'll talk about later, in almost every case, we were consistently erring on the side of being conservative. When we talk about how long is the average car, how many trucks are in this model, how much spacing is there between cars, the actual sim traffic model actually shows less cars and can actually get through here because it is being so conservative. So we went out there and we counted the queues. Amy, if you could pull up the queue graph just to show you kind of what that looks like. Again, this is the same time period. This is early November. When you pull up this chart right here, this is going to show you the actual physical counted queues. So there's 2 lanes on Monroe Avenue. That's the 2 different colors here. So as you start at 4:58, we're really looking at the peak hour, which is 4 to 5. This is the actual number of cars that get stopped at that signal light when it is functioning properly. So you can see here, anywhere consistently, it averages right around 15 cars, but right at 5:17 in 30 seconds. Again, I said 5:18 earlier. When we start to do all this, when we start to really take a hard look, all of these things start to correspond and make a lot of sense. And that, we usually do traffic studies and we look at 15-minute intervals. I mean, we went so far with this study, we drilled down to literally to the minute, and you see really where that spikes up, and that's up over 25 cars. So that's over 20% higher than the next highest and 30 to 40% higher than the average. The reason why that's important is because when we talk about queue lengths and when we report them in our traffic study and when we do our analysis and when we make our mitigation, our recommendations, and we report results, we do it based on the 95th percentile. We don't do it by the average, we do it by this. So our traffic study lives here, the worst case scenario, the worst minute. When you actually look at what those corresponding lengths of the queue are, if you could pull up that chart, you'll see that we then go into, and I don't expect everyone to be able to read this. This is all this information in terms of charts and whatnot is contained within the actual TIS as well as the SDEIS. But what this right here is actually shows the queue lengths, what they are today, and then ultimately what they would be if we did no mitigation. So we go from 500 up to 900, but with our mitigation, which has signal coordinations, the addition of the signal light, all things I'm going to talk about later, we have a very similar and actually less of a queue in that area. And again, we're talking that is at 518. I mean, it was drilling down to the minute. So what we're doing here is we're trying to say every way possible that we can verify this mile is correct, this mile is correct, this, let's make sure that this, because everything we go from here is going to build off this baseline condition. And the baseline condition was really the crux of the whole discrepancy back in 2016. So it was of the utmost importance that we made sure that this was right. So eventually it was agreed upon by the town's consultant that we did have all the correct parameters and we were representing the existing conditions correctly with our model. So what that allows us to do, I'm sorry.
Jess, I'm sorry. And I know not everybody can see these numbers. My eyes are straining to see these numbers a little bit. But you referenced the 500 number with the asterisk in the 2016 existing conditions. Can you just explain, because next to it are numbers 893 and 880, and then you have background condition numbers
Yeah, so what we're doing here
projected
is,
as well. And I'm just trying, I want to make sure everybody understands,
Sure.
because that is a chart that is in your SDEIS, and I want to make sure that we all understand what
Sure.
those numbers mean.
Mr. Supervisor, what this is yet another example of how conservative our model actually is. The existing conditions model is saying you're getting queues out there of 900 feet, when on average, when we go out there and count them, we consistently count them, as I just showed you the entire effort that we went through, they're actually 500. So what Synchro does is it's very conservative SimTraffic is very conservative when it estimates the queue lengths. So it estimates at 893, when we actually physically go out there and monitor it day after day, it's really closer to 500. But what that means is it's also being conservative when it's estimating these. But, again, what we're doing is saying, look, we're going to go with the worst case scenario that SimTraffic is telling us, even though we know that that is over the top and that is being conservative. But for the sake of continuing to err on the side of being conservative, we will use that in the model moving forward, even though we know in the real life it's only at about 500 feet average right now. So that's what that's all about. So now we have a baseline condition that's been verified several different ways. It's been reviewed by the consultants. That allows us to really put a stake in the ground and move forward with the development of our traffic impact study. The next step to that is, we got to take the existing conditions and then we add on top of that the traffic that's going to be generated by the proposed Whole Foods Plaza. Now, one of the things, I meant to say this earlier on, and I'm sorry that I didn't, but this workshop and this presentation is largely focused on the corridor and traffic. The SDIS contains more information which has to do with, a reduction in density. So, the original DEIS had a higher density. We removed a mezzanine and reduced the density. We made some site plan improvements. There's other things, I don't mean to represent that I tonight am speaking about everything contained within the document, but as a result of a lot of the public input from last year and a lot of things that we've been hearing from staff members and others, it's really the traffic, specifically on Monroe Avenue, in front of the project is really the, primary thing that we want to discuss this evening. So if anyone wants to go in a different direction or talk about a different part of the SDEIS that's not necessarily covered in this presentation, we'd be more than happy to do that. So trip generations, how much traffic does our project generate? So we went through, and there's a very long and detailed explanation of exactly how we get to our trip generation number that's contained within the actual SDEIS. But really the best way to figure out, and Amy will tell you this, and I do traffic studies as well, and I'll tell you the same thing. If you really want to know what one of your proposed uses is going to generate, go find the most similar use in the most similar environment that exists today, and go count how many cars are going there. Because what we've used in the traffic impact study is the Institution of Transportation Engineers manual that has set rates for, there's 3 manuals, so every single use you could dream up, it has set rates, and that's what we've been using. So one of the questions that came out in the review of the DEIS, I believe from several of the council members, was, hey, I know you got this chart from this manual that's applied across the entire nation. How do I know that these numbers are actually going to be accurate? How do you verify these? So what we did, working with Whole Foods, and Whole Foods actually had some input on this, we said, where else do you guys have a similar environment to this? And they said, go take a look at Darien, Connecticut. If you pull up the aerial, now we're in Connecticut, so I'm sorry if everyone north-south just got thrown off. This is the Connecticut Turnpike here, and this is a main commercial corridor that cuts right through this. And here is what's important, a standalone Whole Food store. Some people have said to us, well, what about the one that they built in Albany 2 or 3 years ago? Well, that's in the middle of a plaza, and there's no way to actually determine how many cars are going to just that use when everyone's using the plaza. It's like trying to figure out how many people go to Black and Blue down at the Pittsburgh Plaza. It's tough. But what we try to find is, all right, what's the most similar? In this case, we have very similar demographics. We did research and we looked at population densities. We looked at average income. We went so far as to say, if I live in Darien and I don't shop at Whole Foods, where do I shop? Well, there's a Stop and Shop that is about a half mile up the road. Similarly, we have a large grocer a half mile down from us. And then very heavily...
I just want to be sure, though, you're not suggesting that a Stop and Shop is comparable to a Wegmans.
Not at all. And I want, the reason why that's important, and I have a whole part about this in the presentation. Stop and Shop does not offer nearly the same variety and quality of products. I don't want to say quality, because I'm sure they all have good quality, but the same variety of products, especially when it comes to things like organic foods, that are comparable to what Whole Foods has. So if you want a certain basket of food that may tend to your lifestyle a certain way, here you can go to Wegmans and get that. In Darien, you can't get that at Stop and Shop. You have to go to Whole Foods. So what I'm trying to say is for the people that are targeting the type of food and grocery that Whole Foods is going to sell or would sell here in Monroe County, there's a lot more options here than there are in Darien. And why that's important is it doesn't mean everybody has to go to Whole Foods in Darien like they do. That wouldn't be the case here. That traffic gets spread out a lot more. So if you live in Irondequoit, you don't necessarily have to go to Whole Foods. You can go to the Wegmans in Irondequoit to get a lot of that stuff. And that's why that's important. So here you have a 95 comparable to 590 in the sense that it's a expressway. Obviously, 95 is one of the biggest roads in the country. Commercial corridor, standalone Whole Foods, right off of 95, all very similar. So what we actually got was, what are the traffic counts from this Whole Foods? And I want to say, this Whole Foods is only 40,000 square feet in area. The Whole Foods that's proposed for this project as part of the application is 50 square feet. So we actually have a bigger Whole Foods. So let me show you the next step here. All right, this chart's important, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it.
Jess, if I might, in comparing Darien to Brighton here, what about mass transit and public transportation in Darien versus Brighton? Is that taken into account?
It's taken into account in terms of a lot of similar opportunities for mass transit, but not used like it would be in a more urban environment. One of the things that was suggested to us was, why don't you go look at Wegmans on East Avenue? Well, when you start to get into those more urban environments closer to city centers, mass transit is used a lot more. One of the reasons why Darien was more appropriate was because it wasn't directly next to a large urban center. It also wasn't super rural either. So its proximity to really metropolitan areas played a role in our selection of that because of things like mass transit, because of things like pedestrians and so on. So in that sense it was.
Public transit would be similar then?
Correct.
To what we have in Brighton.
And used at a similar rate, more importantly.
Thank you.
So this top category is the trips that were generated by our proposal that are used in our traffic impact study based on the IT manual. So we say we have a 50,000 square foot store, then we have AM, PM, and Saturday peak hours. During this presentation, we focus on the PM peak hour because that's really the worst case scenario. That's when you have all the commuter traffic built in. But the study includes an analysis of all of them. So to the extent that you want to look at Saturday or look at the AM, it's not as exciting because there's nowhere near as many cars on the road, but we can certainly do that. And again, we want to be looking at when the most cars are on the road, not necessarily when our project's using the most. But again, all of that is included in the traffic impact study. So based on a 50,000 square foot store, using the rate in the IT manual, let's just zoom over here and skip the AM. Oh, you see what the numbers are. So in the PM peak, we're saying we got about 228 vehicles that are exiting, about 238 that are entering, and then Saturday the numbers are, a bit higher. The actual counts in Darien are down at 155, 155. Actually, it's amazing that worked out exactly right. 160 and 180. So they are substantially less than what we're using as part of our study for our projections. So one of the things you might say is, well, of course they're less. There's 40,000 square foot store. You're a 50,000 square foot store. Well, yeah, we understand that. And what we did was we took a look at, if we take this rate based on a certain square footage and apply that to 50,000 square foot, what do those numbers look like? So that's where you get, when you apply that rate, you go from 155 to 194, from 160 to 200, and so on and so forth. So even when you take the rate from Darien and you apply it to the Brighton project, you're still well below, almost consistently 40 vehicles entering and 40 vehicles exiting. That's 80 cars during the peak hour, below the projections we're using. So again, that's showing you that that's being conservative. Then on top of that, when we talk to Whole Foods, they say Monroe Avenue in Rochester is not going to do anywhere near the amount of sales, that we do in Darien. And if they do, we think that would be great, but we're not projecting Brighton to have the same amount of sales that, let's say, we have in Darien right now. So again, just more conservative built into this. So even after all that said, even though we've proved and we can make a very good case that we could go back into our traffic study and use these numbers and say, look, we went out and verified it. We have hard data. We're confident in that data. We're going to use these numbers. We said, no, we're going to stay with our original projections that were used in the IT manual because, again, we're being conservative. We want to make sure that this board and other stakeholders in the project are confident in the results and that we're not trying to cut any corners. So that's how we developed the trip generations that we could then take and add on to the existing conditions model. So from that point, we're going to kind of circle back and start to talk about where we were to begin with, and that is the developed conditions. And there's some things here that I want to point out and talk about as they relate to mitigation, because one of the most important parts of the project is the mitigating factors that help to improve flow along the corridor. As I said earlier, one of the things that's present in this model is coordinated signal timings. So while each of those lights out there now is actuated in the sense that there's signal sensors in the road, which when operating properly, know when to turn lights yellow and green to maximize the efficiency, they're not necessarily talking to, or they're not talking to, the other lights that are in this corridor. If you've gone downtown or other areas, you've ever noticed when you hit a light and it turns green, then just before you hit the next light it turns green, and so on. Well, that's a properly coordinated corridor that's maximizing efficiency. That's not something that we have here. Even on those videos that we looked at from September and November, the flow was much improved, but even still, they weren't coordinated. And one of the things that we are proposing as part of this project is the coordinated of signal timings to have a properly coordinated signal or properly coordinated corridor. And that's not just going to help, the frontage in our project in this area. That's going to help the entire corridor all the way up to Westfall to make sure that traffic is flowing through much more smoothly. Obviously, here you can see this area here represents the introduction of a traffic signal. As was the case with the original DEIS and continues to be the case, the project does meet what's the traffic volumes for a traffic signal or the signal warrants. So a signal is warranted in order to allow the safe passage of vehicles into and out of the site in a controlled environment. Quite frankly, a year or so ago when you had Mario's Restaurant and Clover's Lanes and Mama San's and all the other uses that were in there, If you were to actually do the study and look at the amount of traffic that they are created, and again, this information is included in our TIS, they also warrant a signal. So this signal has always really been warranted for the safety of these folks, and continues to be the case. What you see here is our revised access point that comes into the site. You see it's got a full 2 lanes coming in and a full 2 lanes going out. One of the things that we've done, and I'll spare you a great amount of detail, is we've really, from the original DEIS, we've eliminated a lot of these internal curb cuts that once existed. So what that does is that basically ensures that we don't have an internal gridlock scenario. Now, there used to be a curb cut right here into this pad site, so if you were coming in here and decided to take a left, and this car had to wait behind you, and they had to wait behind you, and then these guys were backed up, you could create a gridlock situation. We've eliminated that to make sure there's a much smoother traffic flow interior to the project. And you can start to see the cars exiting, stacking up here. What you'll see is about a maximum stack of approximately 8 cars, which is almost coming here before that turns on to let them out.
Jess, can I stop you there for a moment?
Absolutely.
I just want to, looking at the numbers on the right, I take it that this is at about 5:38, 5:37 on a weekday.
More or less correct.
For over a minute, as I watched that simulation, and continuing now as you continue to roll, I have not seen a single car come into the left turn, the signalized left turn, to turn into the Whole Foods
Here?
in that lane, correct?
That's a good segue to talk about our access points, if you don't mind. I'm going to get there, although it might be a touch indirectly. So for starters, I just want to point out, this goes without saying, is represented in our documents. These are only 2 access points. There's no proposed access to Clover, and there's no access going up to Allen's Creek. We've represented that before. That continues to be the case. We talked about this position, this access here. What we have here is a right in or a right out, so you can't take a left out of this project. We're going to talk a lot about how dangerous unprotected lefts are, but you can take a right. You can also take a left into the project here. And one of the reasons why, there's a lot of conversations with the DOT where they said, why wouldn't you just prohibit lefts here, don't let them go here, and make them all use the light? Well, the reality is the gaps that are created off of this light are ultimately utilized, and these folks get a chance then to make a left-hand turn into here without having to travel all the way down to the signal light. So if you're looking for them to take a left here, one of the reasons why you may not be seeing them is because a lot of them are escaping and taking a left in up here.
But right now, what I'm seeing are 6, 7, 8 cars lined up there in the left turn lane to make that left.
Right,
Logically,
And when properly coordinated, and we stop them here, they all get the opportunity then to enter up here.
but as they're driving by, it just, now for the first time, I'm seeing
These
2
guys.
cars who were in that, what I guess is a left or through lane, if I'm seeing that arrow correctly.
It's like left only.
Well, I'm not sure it is.
No, it's a left.
The top one, the unsignalized, I can't tell if that's
They're both left in. This up here is currently a left through, so you could continue to
that's
go
what I,
forward.
yeah, that's
But you
what I
still
thought.
have the
It's
full.
just coded that way for the purpose of the analysis
Okay.
in the simulation, because it's a computer model and it doesn't understand how to do that. So you have to code it as a left and through lane. It will be marked as a left turn only lane, but we do expect that people may get in that lane by mistake, thinking that they want to turn left at the next driveway. And we do also expect that more traffic will use the unsignalized left turn to enter the site than the signalized left turn.
And that's because those gaps create off
Yeah.
the lights.
And it's very typical that when you have any kind of land use and you have 2 driveways, drivers will typically use the first driveway that they come to.
Is it also because it's closer to Whole Foods, the ultimate destination?
Yeah, that could be. It's also closer
Yeah,
to
exactly.
the pad site
This is really
as
the most
well.
convenient way to get to the project.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if you can zoom out for a little bit, Amy, or, but I don't know if, one of the things I want to point out here is, one of the main, it's been called and referred to, and it really is an amenity, is the development of an access management plan. I just wanted to kind of reiterate on that. And what the access management plan is, and it was originally presented in the DEIS and continues to be proposed as part of the SDEIS, is the introduction of cross-access easements and drive lanes for all of these properties on the south side of Monroe Avenue. And the situation that you have now, if you remember earlier, there was a car that tried to slip out and take a left. They said, we'll get back to that later. Well, what you have is all these uses right now, what used to be Friendly's and now is going to be a City Mattress, Socorro Home, Dunkin' Donuts down here further, but all these different uses have uncontrolled curb cuts. So everyone, if you want to take a left, you sit there and you put your blinker on and you wait and you wait and you wait, and then you try to shoot the gap when you can. And if we were even to try to model that in Synchro, we never could, because real life drivers have a lot more courage than our little simulated drivers here. So what the proposed access management plan does is it proposes significant construction improvements to allow all of these 5 properties here on the west side, which we're calling phase 1 of the access management plan, where we actually have signed easement agreements, which are part of the DEIS and the SDIS, the ability to say, okay, if I want to take a left turn, I can go over to the signal light, wait for that thing to give me a green, and then take a left without having to try to get through these gaps. So that's very important. That cuts down on the amount of really dangerous traffic movements. We can talk about congestion all we want. We can talk about, well, I had to wait 2 traffic. That's not me, right? Oh, sorry. We had to, I had to wait 2 traffic lights before this gets through. And congestion is one thing. Traffic safety is another thing. And one of the most important things about the access management plan is it significantly improves traffic safety and these dangerous left-hand turns and left-hand turn-ins. You also have the ability now to take a left in to enter all these properties, which makes it much, much safer for patrons using it there, and much less of an opportunity, from really starting to get involved in this project and I've looked at more videos of a drone and more traffic simulations than one should ever be subject to in their lifetime. But one of the things I saw was, when you really want to see, pandemonium, have an accident in this corridor, or have somebody get stuck trying to turn a left, where it just backs up so quickly, and then it takes forever to recover. It happens like that, and then takes, just an incredible amount of time. I mean, cycles and cycles, 10, 15, 20 minutes to possibly recover. So the access management plan seeks to and will eliminate a lot of those dangerous movements that contribute to that. Now, is that going to potentially happen elsewhere in the corridor? Could that happen over here in Clover? Could that still happen? Of course it could. We can't control every driver, but certainly we are now proposing to give them options to both enter and exit the site safely for all of these properties. Again, these 5 properties here as part of phase 1. And then, this really opens up the opportunity as these properties on the east end are redeveloped to also take advantage of that access management plan. So that is certainly one of the large mitigating factors for the proposed project, is they now can use this signal light. They now have the ability to exit. And it also creates a much safer pedestrian way for people, for pets to cross here if they wanted to, use this area, come down from the trail. Again, other improvements in the SDIS include pedestrian improvements for the trail system over here at Clover, over here at Allen's Creek. Again, I didn't choose to focus on them because they have been approved by the Monroe County DOT, and they don't seem to be a major discussion point because they seem to make a lot of sense. But all those things are still exist within our document.
Jess, since you just highlighted a particular area there, I want to clarify. I want to make sure I understand, because your model shows a driveway, correct, which is now going into the rear of what is I believe that's the veterinary hospital building.
Right, VSES.
But I want to clarify that that is not a driveway that this model is showing as being connected to the Whole Foods Plaza proposal, and that you are not, in the proposal right now, proposing an access point onto Clover Street servicing the proposed plaza.
You are 100% correct in all of your statements.
Okay.
So the whole reason for the access management plan, I shouldn't say the reason for it, but the access management plan is being offered as an amenity because, along with other things, but I think one that is most applicable to the traffic in the corridor, because the proposal is for 90,000 total square feet. Whereas when you use the density requirements of the BF1 zoning district, it's 70,400 square feet. So approximately, the application is seeking 19,600 square feet more than what the underlying zoning would allow. Now, we're also going to talk about other uses in that zoning district, but that incentive zoning was the trigger for the development of the access management plan. So I want to talk about a lot of comments that we received during the public hearings, the written comments in 2016. There's a lot of comments that said, well, this project is too dense. This is it's supersized. It's, way bigger than could ever possibly be imagined on this site. And, while, yes, I'm admitting that, we are 19,600 square feet bigger than the underlying zoning, there are ways that we looked at to say, is this really too dense? The first thing we did was we looked at it and said, okay, well, one of the things that Amy brought up, because she does this for a living, including representing some of the biggest grocers and retailers in the country, said, these grocery store uses, they're not the highest trip generator that you put in a commercial district. Restaurants, things like banks. All allowed uses in this district, those generate far more traffic on a per rate basis than what this would here. So then that led us to look at, okay, what's an alternative plan that could be developed meeting the density requirements for this plaza? And Amy, if you want to pull up the comparison. Because, and actually, as it's written in the scope of the EIS, is that we are required to look at, what does it look like with the allowable density? And, that's what plan is that we have here. Right now, it's being referred to as the baseline. So when you read through the SDIS, when you have the opportunity to do that, both for council members, also for members of the public that are here today, Alternative 6, the baseline, is really what we could build in this district given the density requirements of 70,040 square feet. And what I'm going to do is pull up a site plan, which you're going to notice looks remarkably similar to our proposal, just to show you, how similar they actually are. And even here, when we look at, I was just going to point to it. When you look at the trips here, 341, Alternative 1 is our proposed plan, versus 340, 346 versus 342, 353, in this case higher, 459, 456 for 4. All these numbers are showing you that when you go up 20,000 square feet, the resulting amount of traffic generated by this project is not substantially different. So if I'm not exactly in favor of this project, I'm going to say, how can that possibly be? That's crazy. You're crazy. Well, again, it goes back to the types of uses that could be put in there, and the fact that we are putting in uses that are not the highest trip generators that there are. Yeah, does Whole Foods generate more than a mattress store? Yes, it does. But again, it's not the really big high trip generators. And if you pull up the site plan there. So this is our alternative plan that's included in the SDEIS. This is our baseline condition. This is what was analyzed, which says, okay, we've adjusted the site plan. We've actually moved. We still have a 50,000 square foot building as a grocery store. We've jostled it around so that meets all the setbacks. What would this look like if we actually applied the BF1 setbacks? Well, for starters, this building can't be up close to the right-of-way, which in a lot of urban planning, we want our buildings closer to the right-of-way. We want the parking in the back. But if you just apply the zoning as it is, you move this building back, the pad site, you move the 50,000 square foot building back, you still have the pad site. Now you have all this parking out front, which you wouldn't necessarily want. We still have our building back here that's, smaller than it was. But then when you look at the different uses that this could be, whether it be a restaurant, whether it be a bank, whether it be a bowling alley, things like that, those types of uses all can generate more traffic. So that analysis is provided within the SDEIS. That's actually a more thorough analysis than was initially presented in the first DEIS. Really the intent of this plan was to say, if you were not allowed to have more than the density requirements, or if, I shouldn't say not allowed, but if we found through this process that it wasn't appropriate, what would be the next logical proposal? And this is the next logical proposal that would, but this doesn't get you the access management plan. This doesn't get the coordinated signal timings. This doesn't get a lot of the pedestrian upgrades that are off-site that we're proposing. But it is the baseline condition that we were required to analyze as part of the scope of the DEIS.
Jess, can you have made certain assumptions about what those uses are for the pad as well as for the retail building. Could you describe what those assumptions are? You've
Yeah,
alluded
this
to
would-
high,
this-
that I presume would still be a Whole Foods,
Yep.
but I'm interested in the pad out
This
front.
would still be what
A
we call a
Starbucks?
quick turnover restaurant,
Well,
a Starbucks,
I was going to say, my understanding is the applicant has a
correct.
lease agreement
That's
with
correct.
Yes.
Starbucks, so we're going
Well,
to,
this is still Starbucks.
okay.
And then this, can you zoom in on this? Amy, are you able to? Then we looked at an end cap restaurant, comparable, actually smaller than the Mario's that was once there, very common of these types of plazas. So we looked at a potential end cap restaurant and then a small bank with a drive-through on this side. And in the middle continued to be the same retail that's proposed for the entire building as part of the plan that's been brought forward as part of the application. So we swapped out, or we looked at, a restaurant and this bank, which are still relatively small, 8,000 square foot restaurant's pretty small, 4,000 square foot bank, instead of if we just applied the retail component to that part of the plaza. So going along, one of the other things that's included in the SDIS, I pardon for the quality on this, but we did look at, is it unreasonable to ask for 19,600 square feet more than what's allowed by code, given that the amenities that we're asking for. And one of the things that we started to do is look at our surroundings. One of the things when we're doing any kind of land development is we say, is this compatible with what else is going on in the corridor? Is this compatible with other land uses, other things that have been developed? And if you, Amy, can bring that up and scroll through it real quick.
What size
Oh, sorry.
Whole Foods is that?
Same size, 50,000. The Whole Foods building, the footprint is exactly the same. We just moved it back and around to meet the setbacks. There's a building here that was eliminated, and then we still have that there. So again, it's not substantially different. I mean, 20,000 square feet on a 70,000 square foot project isn't, it's not like we're going from 70 and asking for 200. I think this plan does a good job of showing you that the project at the end of the day isn't substantially different. And one of the things I do want to point out is, has been pointed out by some of the public comments, is, well, you would require a special permit to exceed 20,000 square feet in this particular zoning district. And yes, of course, we're fully aware of that. And that's why the special permit process is in place. So as long as you meet those standards, a special use permit could be issued. The scope of the DEIS does not say you need to analyze a baseline or alternative that doesn't require a special use permit. It says you can't, or you have to analyze an alternative that meets the density requirements, 70,400 square feet, which is what this does. So this is a bunch of sites, both to the south and also to the north of us, northwest, southeast, where we looked at 12 corners. And we also looked at the intersection right next to us, and we just said, okay, how big is their site? How big is the buildings? What's actually allowed by code? What percentage are they above code? And we're not trying to say, that most of these are pre-existing uses that have been there a long time. They weren't necessarily approved recently by this board, but it goes back to compatibility. What does our project look like in the grand scope of this corridor? And, the results are, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, that we are consistent, in many cases less. So you can drop that. So, that's basically the gist of the presentation. Just in conclusion, the real reason why we got into this supplemental draft environmental impact statement was the malfunctioning signal light at Clover and Monroe. We spent an exhaustive amount of time working with town staff, also with town's consultants, to make sure that we really drilled down and nailed that baseline condition, also including the state DOT. I think the end product, the revised traffic impact study, is substantially more accurate now that we have that accurate information, and now that it's experienced a thorough vetting of the experts on both sides of the aisle here. And I just want to say, again, I know I've mentioned it a couple of times, but time and time again, we have erred on the side of being conservative. We are looking at 5/18. We are looking at, the most critical possible moment to really analyze that and carry this across. Our simulations, which then, are how we get our results that are then published in the TIS. Those are based on settings that say, I'm going to give you, my car is going to stay at least 40 feet away from your car, and I'm only going to travel at 25 miles an hour. And those are not maybe necessarily the exact numbers, but the settings were always erring on the side of conservative. That's why if you count the number of cars that shoot through right here with a 57-second green time, you're going to get, you know, somewhere around 56 to 58. But we know in reality it's really 62 to 64. But the reality is, even with the lower number, the more conservative number, you know, it still shows, you know, through the results of the SDIS that it is operating at, you know, a condition that's improved when compared to what's out there today. And a big part of that, again, is signal coordination, getting the corridor coordinated. I mean, that's big. I mean, you call it smart traffic. There's other names for it. But, you know, that's really an important part to making sure that this thing functions effectively. And again, lastly, the trip generations. You know, we spent a lot of time between the DEIS and the SDIS, you know, talking to Whole Foods, looking at different sites, trying to find that unicorn that best lines up with this site here so that we could be very confident in those numbers. And then on top of that, we still went and used numbers that were, you know, significantly higher than what we found there. So I think that was all very important. It all goes to show that, you know, we are being responsible, we are being conservative. You can rely on what the results are, you know. You can make your own decision based on what the results are, but at least you know that the results are accurate and the results are reflective of what is to be expected when this thing is developed. So
something?
with that,
And
yes.
Jess, if I could add just quickly before we get to the questions, to the supervisor's comment regarding the access point onto Clover Street. Obviously, you know, starting back in 2014 when we invited the neighbors over to Mario's for an informal presentation on what our thoughts and ideas were, where at that time we had proposed an access point onto Clover. You know, we've had many conversations with our engineers, certainly with the neighbors. You know, my kids follow Facebook, so I've seen also some stuff on there. But, you know, I do want to stress that at the end of the day, you know, what we're demonstrating in this traffic study, which was also demonstrated in the previous version of the traffic study, is that the corridor does work. It works post-development of this 90,000 square foot Whole Foods Plaza. It works without access to Clover Street, and that the assumptions that we've made are extremely conservative. And when I say extremely conservative, and again, I'm not a traffic engineer, but we have been a part of many developments, including developments in this town, a car wash, which we went through 3 different traffic studies when we did that car wash, and we were conservative in those traffic studies. This traffic study is even more conservative in the trip generation, in the traffic counts that we've done over and over, in the consultations and the review, really, from the town's traffic engineer and scrutiny from the New York State Department of Transportation. So, you know, with all this conservative data showing that it still works, I guess I want to take this opportunity, because we don't get too many opportunities to talk, to reassure the neighbors that the study is accurate, this development will work, and the fact of the matter is, I know there's been concern over and over again from the neighbors that, yeah, that's great, you guys are going to build it, and then 2 years later, you know, you're going to be crying that you need an access point onto Clover. That's just not the case, and that is what this traffic study is showing, and you know, I just personally, and backing up my personal commitment along with data, expressing that we do not intend on opening that access, aside from the fact that we don't have the right to. It's not what we're proposing, and that this project works in its current state without it. So I just wanted to make that clear, since I know the supervisor brought up that driveway.
Thank you, Danny. I have a number of additional questions, but I don't want to monopolize, so I know, Louise, you were
I was
looking
about to say
Yeah.
two things. In the last month or two, since you've gotten the signals synchronized, I have noticed a difference. I was saying that yesterday I got from Wegmans to my home on Seminole in 6 minutes at 4:30 in the afternoon. So it's better. It's much better. But what I don't get is you presented a picture there of the plaza built to the zoning that it is now, and you kind of downplayed it. It wasn't as good as you wanted, and it wouldn't be satisfactory, and so forth and so on. But you left Whole Foods the same size, the larger Whole Foods. I don't get it. I don't know why you can't make Whole Foods the size that it has to be, or that it should be at that zoning, and then redo, or even, you may even be able to keep those other stores as they are, as you're proposing them. That's been the biggest hurdle, besides the traffic, was the size of Whole Food. And you haven't once decided, well, maybe we can make it a little bit smaller. Taking down the mezzanine doesn't do it.
Yeah, and you know, to speak on behalf of our tenant, because obviously we're not Whole Foods, and you know, we have an agreement with them. You know, the DEIS represented that it was going to be a 55,000 square foot Whole Foods, of which the footprint was still 50,000. It had a 5,000 square foot mezzanine, similar to what Wegmans has down the street. And so we've removed that 5,000 to reduce the density. You know, unfortunately, as with many tenants, especially with national tenants, they have certain requirements. And where, you know, we acknowledge, and believe me, we've asked and said, you know, hey, I've seen 35,000 square foot Whole Foods, I've seen 40,000 square foot Whole Foods. Why can't we, you know, why 50? And the answer to why 50 is pretty clear to them, in that they are a half mile down the street from the flagship store of arguably the premier grocer in the United States. And they meaning Wegmans, spend a lot of money on marketing, on making that store as sexy as possible. That store is 125,000 square feet, which is 2.5 times the size of this proposed store. So it doesn't matter how hard they try in 50,000 feet, it's still not going to be the Pittsford Wegmans, which obviously I don't think anybody needs another Pittsford Wegmans there. But to answer it simply, they don't believe that it's feasible to compete with Wegmans down the street with a smaller store. They don't believe they can outfit it with what it's going to take to compete and succeed.
But it's a whole different market. I mean, it's a whole different, you know, it's not a Wegmans that has everything a grocery would have. It's mostly just, it's organic food. It brings a different type of shopper in, and these types of people, these people that want to go to Whole Foods will go to Whole Foods, no matter what the size is.
Right. You know, and in our conversations with them, they also, I mean, in removing the 5,000 square foot mezzanine, you know, they haven't really removed what they were going to put in 55,000 feet. All they did was compact it into 50,000. So if you say, okay, well, can you do it with 45? The answer is yes, probably. But, you know, the walking area around the prepared food station is just going to be tighter. The aisles are going to be a little more narrow. So, you know, you end up creating an atmosphere in a store that, frankly, is just less desirable, less competitive. And again, I don't want to necessarily, I am here arguing for Whole Foods because they're my tenant, but it's not, you know, it's not a Daniele decision. It's a corporate Whole Foods decision.
And one of the things, just to add, excuse me if I will, that's been interesting, you know, getting to know some of the Whole Foods folks, because I'm by no means a grocery expert, but a lot of, when they make these decisions on how big the store to be and where to locate the store, it really comes down to, you know, what's the average basket size? You know, every person that walks in the front door, we want to have them have a certain amount of product in their basket that translates to a certain price through a calculation. And because of the, you know, pretty stiff competition that's right down the road that I mentioned earlier, you know, they need to have that extra inventory and more options within their store in order to achieve the type of basket price that makes this project feasible. And just one minor thing, I mentioned earlier that, you know, you noticed how much better it was when it was synchronized. It's actually just that much better from the signal coordination, or the signal timings being right. It would actually be even better if it was coordinated. So just something as simple as a signal timing really makes a big drastic improvement.
And just could you clarify that, because I'm a bit confused on it. This simulation anticipates signal coordination. Is that what we're seeing right now?
Correct.
And what is out there now is not coordinated?
Correct. The project, one of the, you know, mitigating factors and one of the amenities for this project is to coordinate the signals and to help work with DOT to provide the infrastructure to coordinate them.
And one of,
Perhaps a naive question, why aren't they coordinated today? What does it take to coordinate signals?
No comment, but.
I do want to, that touches on one of my important, what I think is an important question. And again, I don't mean to monopolize the conversation here, but coordination is important. It's something that's addressed in the DEIS, and it's something that there's been some discussion about with us. And I want to clarify, because as I read what was page 118 of the last supplemental draft environmental impact statement, it indicates that during the PM peak hour, the new signalized driveway is coordinated with the Clover Street signal. But during the Saturday peak, it is coordinated with the 590 ramps. Now, one of the things we have heard is that there was, if you will, a synergy between coordinating the Clover Street signals with the new signals. But now, apparently, during Saturday peak, it would be coordinated with 590. And one of the concerns I raised at the public hearing on the original DEIS has been the need for better smart coordination throughout the whole system, from Westfall through to Clover Street and perhaps beyond into Pittsford, but that's a Pittsford issue. If you can, at different times of the day, coordinate with the interchange and with Clover Street, isn't there a way to, and I know it's up to the state DOT because this is a state highway, but again, why does this model, and maybe you can run this model on Saturday morning to show how the synchronization works with the interchange on Saturdays, and the PM model to show how the synchronization works with the Clover Street intersection, say on an evening rush hour. And then maybe as part of that, explain why it is that you would focus on the synchronization with the one during the one time and the other during the other time.
I can show you Saturday. Let me back up a minute and answer some of your first questions.
Sure.
So the first question was, why isn't it coordinated today? Part of the problem is that you can only coordinate traffic signals that are a certain distance apart. When they get too far apart, like Clover Street and the ramps, it becomes difficult to provide appropriate coordination because there's too much distance to travel between the signals. That's part of it. The other part of it is that because of the size of the Clover Street intersection, that signal has to run on a very long cycle length. Right now, it's running at 135 seconds. The signals at the 590 ramps only run at 80 or 100 seconds, depending on the peak time period. So in order to coordinate traffic signals, they all have to be running on the same cycle length, or half cycle lengths.
But the proposed signal does bridge that gap to where now
Right.
they're all close enough that you could implement the coordination.
Right. So that's the first.
Can
Show the PM first.
can so-called fully demand-driven signals, wireless signalization systems operate in a world where the underlying cycle at those side inputs is different, the 130 seconds plus and the 90 or so second at the interchange is
But part of the advantage of smart signal technology is that it operates very well when you have a heavy main line and variable traffic on the side roads.
like this. Is that a good description of what we have here?
No, what we have here is very consistent throughout the hour, even on the side roads. The traffic volumes are consistent for the whole peak hour. So what would happen is if you had smart technology out here, it would improve the operating conditions outside of the peak hours. But during the peak hour, it would be exactly as you see it because there is nothing to improve upon.
Are you saying that if you go from Clover to Monroe, all that way, you cannot you can't coordinate the whole stretch because they're different traffic.
We're talking about two different things, right? Coordination versus.
I mean, I've noticed that you go from Clover to the on-ramp,
Yep,
and then after that, everything's coordinated.
that's right.
So you can't, it's impossible to coordinate the whole stretch from Clover to Monroe?
It is partly right now because we don't have the signal in the middle at our driveway, but also partly because the signal at Clover has to operate at a different cycle length than those others. So at the 2590 ramps and then at Westfall, they're all operating on the same cycle length, so they can be coordinated.
Thank you. I mean, can we see the Saturday?
Yep.
So that we can see how that synchronization, coordination rather works, and then maybe we can also see the PM coordination between the new intersection and the Clover Monroe.
Okay, so this is Saturday, and you'll notice that the peak hour is different, and
And
we've
if you
also...
can, if you can zoom in on
Yep.
that so we can all see a little better.
Do you want to see Clover Monroe or the?
No, I think based on the fact that you're coordinating with the interchange, I think I want to see the interchange and the signalized, yes. Because that, I assume you anticipate tying together to optimize those conditions, okay.
Yes, and the way this works and the way DOT in this region tends to coordinate their traffic signals is that at the end of the yellow cycle on Monroe Avenue is when they coordinate. So every time the yellow time period ends at one signal, there's a certain number of seconds of offset between one signal and the next.
So we're looking at the traffic coming off of northbound 590.
Yes.
And obviously, we're also, although we can't see it all, significant amount of traffic releasing from southbound 590 into Monroe. Now, what is the coordination between those interchange signals and the proposed new signal? How does that coordinate? Is one red when the other is green, or is there a certain number of seconds that?
Yeah.
Because I ask partly because, yes, I'm concerned about traffic flow on Monroe Avenue, but I'm very concerned, particularly based on some of the data in your original DEIS, although I know it is now mitigated somewhat through the change in your driveway configuration, but I'm also very concerned in making sure that people coming out of the plaza have sufficient opportunity to get out. And I want to see how that all works in this coordinated mode, because based on the data I saw earlier, Saturday peak is really the most critical period, at least for some of the maneuvers.
So the Saturday time period is higher for traffic exiting the site, but overall, when you consider the traffic that's on Monroe Avenue, the PM commuter time period is really the more critical peak when you consider everything and how it will operate. But obviously, we look at all three peaks, AM, PM, and Saturday. In this, what you're concerned with the traffic exiting the site is really more of a concern during the PM peak hour, because the eastbound traffic on Monroe Avenue is much higher during the PM peak hour than it is on Saturday. And it's more balanced on Saturday than it is during the PM peak hour.
True.
So we have a lot of eastbound traffic on Monroe Avenue in the PM peak and less traffic westbound during the PM peak on Monroe. On Saturday, those two flows are almost equal.
Yes, they are.
Which makes the signal timings a little bit different during the two peaks, which is why we can coordinate the driveway with the 590 ramps on Saturday, and it's more preferable to coordinate the driveway with the Clover Street intersection during the PM peak hour.
Okay.
If I can jump in quickly, as far as coordinating, now, you had said before that they're not coordinated now because the signal lights at the 590 interchange and Clover Street are too far apart, number one. And number two, the Clover Street cycling time is 135 seconds, whereas up at the 590 interchange, it's about 65 to 70.
No, it's 80 to 100.
80 to 100, so they
Yeah.
have to either be on
Yeah.
the same cycling time or half.
Exactly.
So, now, if we have the other light then at the plaza entrance, will we be able to put them on the same cycling times or the half cycling times in order to
Yes.
coordinate them?
So during the PM peak hour, the driveway signal will operate at the same cycle length
can you bring up
as
the PM?
Clover Street.
Let's take a look at that if you don't mind, because it shows it very well.
So here's PM.
You're going to have to go forward, like,
You want me to do?
yeah, right there.
Oop.
I'm going to say just before the turn screen.
See if we can catch it.
There's nobody in the plaza.
So in the PM peak, which is really the concern for getting traffic out, because one of the concerns that DOT had, and I think the town had as well, is that traffic will back up on Monroe Avenue through the new traffic signal and not allow any room for traffic to exit the site onto Monroe Avenue, even when they have a green signal. So the way we've coordinated these two traffic signals during the PM peak hour is that the traffic exiting the site will have a green traffic signal at the same time that the southbound Clover Street has a green signal. So what happens is, at that point, the eastbound traffic on Clover Street has flushed out to the point where it's not backed up to the site driveway, and there is space behind the queue on Monroe Avenue for the traffic to exit the site and fill into that space. And then the next thing that happens is that the traffic in the eastbound direction at Clover Street turns green, releasing that, and then clearing the queue out.
Now that's, thank you, because that's what I was, and I had seen that and gotten that explanation. Can you give a similar explanation and how the flows work on the Saturday morning peak when you coordinate between the interchange and the new signal? Because presumably there was a thought process and a traffic flow and an egress concern that led to changing the coordination at that time of day. I know you indicated, and it makes sense, that east and westbound on Monroe are much more closely correlated on the Saturday peak because you don't have the business rush hour. The rush is really to shop at Wegmans and other retail establishments. But I'm just interested in seeing the coordination between those two lights to make sure that the traffic particularly is able to egress from the plaza.
Yeah, and just to give you an example on the traffic flows, in the PM peak hour at the site driveway, the eastbound through traffic in the fully developed condition is 1895, 1,895 vehicles in the eastbound direction. In the westbound direction, it is 1764. And then on Saturday, it's 1834 and 1701. So we're talking about a little bit of a difference there.
How long does it take if it goes out of whack, how long does it take to fix?
Out of whack, meaning
Well,
Meaning it's
the way
not
it's
synchronized
malfunctioning
anymore.
today?
Let's
or-
talk about some out of whacks, because one out of whacks, and I don't, mean to call it but when a pedestrian pushes the crossing button, either at the new signalized intersection or at Clover and Monroe, that changes this synchronized system. That's not out of whack. We want pedestrians to be accommodated,
Yeah.
but it changes that synchronization. So in that kind of scenario, can your model show that? And to Louise's question, how long does it take to get back into the,
Into where?
Pedestrians are actually built into the model, correct me if
Yeah,
I'm wrong,
yeah,
so we do
they are.
account for that.
Yeah.
Usually it takes, what, a couple cycles?
2 to 3 cycles until it gets back. So what happens is when a pedestrian pushes the button, that extends the green time. So for example, if you want to cross Monroe Avenue at Clover and you push the button, that's going to extend the green time on Clover so that the pedestrian can cross Monroe Avenue. The Monroe Avenue traffic is stopped. So they'll be stopped longer than they normally are. So on the next cycle, it has to catch back up. So if it were coordinated with the signal at the driveway, what would happen is at the end of the yellow phase, the signals will talk to each other and say, hey, we need to make sure the end of our yellow phase is back in sync. So, don't give as much time to the side road next time. And it'll take a cycle or two until that happens and it catches back up.
And Amy, that's all that the pedestrian signal does, is extend the green time? It doesn't change the start of the next green time, it just extends the green time?
It extends, yeah. So what happens is if you push the button and there's no green on Clover yet, and then the next phase, you have to wait to cross until the green comes up on Clover.
Regular phase?
Right. So it'll cycle through the way it normally does, but then it'll make that phase long enough so that you have time to actually cross the street.
But Mr. Daniele said about a month ago or so, you had it all set up, but then it went haywire and had to
Yeah.
be reset again. That's what I'm asking. If that happens, and I'm sure it
Well,
does.
so what's happening right now is that, or what has happened in the last 9 months or so, is that a couple of the pedestrian buttons got stuck in the pushed on mode. So every time the signal cycled through, it thought there was a pedestrian that wanted to cross, and it was messing up the signal timings for every single cycle. So when that happens, someone has to notice it and contact New York State DOT. They have to send a crew out to reset the system.
I have one other question. At first, you said that the second entrance was going to be right-hand turn out, right-hand turn in. But then at the end of the presentation, you said they were going to go both ways.
No, you could come in, you could take a right in or a left in, but only a right out. So the left out turn is the restricted movement. So you could take a left in.
Yeah.
Again, that's important because a lot of people have the gaps that are coming from the proposed signal light that allows them a chance to get in. And it's also, as I believe one of the council members pointed out, more convenient to get to the Whole Foods Plaza. So yes, it is a left in, right in, but only a right out.
That left in, though, can be interfered with by people exiting the site. Monroe Avenue traffic's being halted westbound when they're taking a left in at that first intersection. But the people coming out of the site, going towards the expressway,
At the signal.
when
If
they
they,
come out at
if
the
they
signal.
exit at
yes.
the signal and turn right, they would be in conflict with a left turn. We would expect that movement to be quite small, especially because of the way the driveway is located for the Starbucks pad and where Whole Foods is located. Those are the two primary uses on the site that are going to generate the majority of the traffic. So I would expect the majority of the right turns exiting the site to use the unsignalized driveway.
so the is what you're saying then, that internally, the exit out of the Starbucks drive-through exits onto the driveway that exits to the unsignalized intersection?
Yeah, and if you zoom in, that's what you see here is.
Yeah,
One thing
okay.
I mentioned earlier is previously in the site plan submitted as part of the DEIS, there was a curb cut into the Starbucks
Correct.
back here.
Yep.
Had the potential to screw that up a bit. Now it's been relocated back in here so that people that come in and enter Starbucks and also people leaving Starbucks can slip out to the right with that right-hand turn.
Okay. One of the other things that can screw up, or I can't remember the term Louise used, but it was a good one. It was not a technical term, and we all understand it.
Out of whack.
Out of whack, yes, exactly. One of the other things that can make this area out of whack are, in general, ingress and egress maneuvers from other driveways. And I know that the access management plan, which is a good thing, limits those by encouraging those, giving those folks at those 5 locations an opportunity to ingress and egress from a signalized light. But those other driveways along and near this stretch of Monroe Avenue are still open and will continue. And in particular, the driveway that I think probably causes the most difficulty is the driveway into the left turn into the Clover Commons Plaza, just to the east of Clover Street, very close to the Brighton-Pittsford town line. And that causes problems for a number of reasons. One, it is very close to the left turn lane onto southbound Clover Street from westbound Monroe, so it's hard for people to get over into the left turn to make that turn, which means that they're in the through lane, which backs up traffic through the Clover-Monroe intersection and can throw things out of whack. Does this model, and I know you've talked about, and frankly so have we, talked about how important it is that these models, these simulations accurately reflect reality. The visible model, the visible simulation that we saw does not show traffic stopped because people are making left turns into other driveways. And that one in particular causes problems. Does this simulation model reflect that, and if so, how?
Well, for starters, obviously, I think one of the main issues with that other one is that, there's a Starbucks there, which is, as I talked earlier about certain uses generating, disproportionate amount of traffic. So, yeah, moving it here, it doesn't.
But we don't know what could go in there in the future.
Correct.
Whether it could be a well-known southern chicken chain or something else.
But I think Starbucks is like the highest trip generator, that one of the highest ones that we use. But one of the things that the computer model cannot do is we cannot necessarily force it to do things like crash. Like you'll never actually see 2 cars crash. So the way to
That I understand.
Right.
That
So the
I
way-
don't expect.
Right. So the way to offset it is, and one of the reasons why the model is so conservative, it will never do that. It will do everything to go out of its way not to create a conflict. So the way that you really have to deal with that is by building all these conservative elements into that, and working through the settings like Amy and her team has done with Stantec to make sure that for those particular cases, we're just building more and more traffic into the model. But to answer the question of can you get a car physically stuck? No, you can't get it stuck, but you can add all types of conservative settings to make the results similar to what we see in the field, which is why it's so important to verify things in the field over and over and over again, including looking at that condition when it happens to what our model shows.
Right, and because this is a very important topic. So, and this question's been brought up before, and the real answer, and as the developer paying for the traffic study, we pay a lot of money. They do a traffic study. It shows results. I say, are these results accurate? They say yes, and then we give it to DOT a year and a half ago, and DOT says, wait a second, that doesn't reflect actual conditions. And I say, well, where's the disconnect? So besides the malfunctioning traffic signal, the disconnect is that the DOT, and by recommendation of the town's engineers, they asked us to build in other words, add more cars that don't actually exist on the corridor. And what that does is trick the simulation into accounting for these things like the left-hand turn, the courtesy lefts that block traffic, so that when you're actually looking at the computer model, it looks like real conditions. And so you have to, quote unquote, cheat the system by adding in extra elements call it more conservative, call it accounting for real-life conditions that the computer just, or the program is not built to account for.
simulate
So that the
things.
end result looks like real results, as opposed to, there's never an accident, there's never a courtesy left, which is not realistic either, so.
That's right. And the model also takes into account things like the fact that there are bus stops out here, and the bus does stop and, take on passengers and release passengers, and that affects the traffic flow as well. So the model takes all of that into account, and then on top of that is conservative to account for driveway friction and that kind of a thing. I will say, regarding that one driveway that you're talking about, I have seen that happen. It does happen now. It will continue to happen. We have no control over that driveway or what the use will be in that site once Starbucks moves out. So and one of the things that a traffic study does is it tries to look at realistic conditions that happen on a daily basis, but not unusual conditions, like a traffic accident or what you're talking about with someone, it happens once or twice an hour. It doesn't look at that.
Again, please jump in to my colleagues if you have questions, but one of the other concerns, and it occurs in other places along Monroe Avenue, particularly down into Pittsford, where you have driveways that are close to each other and left turns where the left turn traffic from one can back up into the left turn area from the other. Does your simulation model show situations where the left turn lane on Monroe Avenue eastbound at the signal backs up into the left turn lane for the unsignalized intersection? And if so, does that cause safety or delay issues because people who would want to make that left turn into the unsignalized intersection can't get there and they don't know what to do, or they panic, or?
So the model is set up so that that can happen. Traffic can get in the left turn lane for the unsignalized driveway and continue through to the signalized driveway. I wouldn't expect that to happen too often. If you're a motorist and you're backed up in that lane and you're waiting to turn left and you get an opportunity to turn left into the unsignalized driveway, you're going to take it. And
I
you're not
guess
gonna-
my concern is if you can't get to it, if the signalized traffic ever backs up, again, based on the numbers, into the place where you would make the unsignalized turn, and then people wind up stopping in one of the through lanes. I didn't see that, and it may be because you don't anticipate, but I guess I'll note, and you've heard me beat this horse before, but I think it is relevant to conditions like this. We talked about the worst minute when you showed the queuing. I think it's important to note that while that may be the worst minute of the sort of average time of year PM rush, we know that at one point in this analysis, there was a different standard being used, the 30th worst hour of the year, which is an hour that would occur during the holiday season when, admittedly, traffic conditions here get very, very bad. And I understand, because we went through that at some length during the during the public hearing on the draft environmental impact statement. But what we're seeing in this simulation is not that holiday worst minute. It's really it's the normal rush hour worst minute. And as we know, we can get to worse conditions like that. And I want to make sure, from a highway engineer's perspective, that although you haven't shown that in this simulation, I know that some of the video shows those timeframes, that we're not creating hazards in those hours that could be better optimized with this. I'm not sure if I got that point across as clearly as I could have. It was a run-on sentence. But you know I've been concerned about performance during the holiday season, and the fact that originally you talked about the 30th worst hour. I know you've gone away from that, but that's piqued my interest throughout, because I know you don't, just like Eastview Mall doesn't build parking lots for 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Black Friday, traffic engineers don't build intersections for the worst hour. But the fact that you held out the 30th worst hour as a relevant time frame got me thinking and got me concerned about how this area will perform during the 30th worst hour of the year.
Well, in the same way that, the coordination of the signals and some of the other improvements that are proposed as part of the project, they're improving conditions, whether you look at November 1st or 5:18 p.m., or whether you look at, December 16th or whatever the Friday is before Christmas. Now, granted, December 16th is going to be a lot worse than November 1st, but the same, theory applies, which is that the implementation of the mitigation member still improves that condition. Yeah, it's going to be worse, but it is going to be improved compared to what it is now.
And every retailer knows that they have to find a way to manage their traffic around the holidays. And just by way of example, I know that the Pittsford Wegmans contracts off-site parking for their employees during that time period. So every retailer has to find a way to manage their traffic during holiday season.
Jess, you talked about trip generation, and under the BF1 zoning, that the uses that would be permitted under that might actually have a higher trip generation than what's being proposed here in your first alternative. What are the uses anticipated? I know some of them, and I wanted to review them. Going from left to right, we're looking at Whole Foods. That's building 1, is that correct?
Correct.
Then 2, the small one, that's Starbucks.
Correct.
The 3, is that a bank, as I recall?
Not in the development proposal. It was in the alternative plan. The additional uses that were included were an 8,000 square foot restaurant and a 4,000 square foot bank. In the proposal that's part of the SDEIS, it's all defined as specialty retail, so retail shops and
So
none of that stuff.
and in the rear there as well, we're not talking about banks or restaurants back there, is that correct?
You could, right? I mean, those would be permitted BF2 uses, correct?
If we were to come in and propose a bank, yeah, but I would say that that would all fall outside of the box that we've created for ourselves, which is this is the development proposal that's being brought forward. This is what's being analyzed. Any change to this, once seeker findings are complete, is really outside of, again, that box we put for us.
Yeah, and some of those uses are conditionally permitted, and they would require special scrutiny from the planning board.
Correct, but as we know, so is a 50,000 square foot Whole
Correct.
Foods.
Correct,
I
correct.
think the supervisor's point is, once the project is built, in years to come, those uses could change.
I mean, what used to be down the street, what used to be Johnny Antonelli Firestone is now Applebee's.
Applebee's,
With
correct.
very different traffic generation. I don't know Pittsford zoning code, but presumably, however that area is zoned, would have permitted both a Johnny Antonelli's and now an Applebee's. I don't know,
Yeah.
what you anticipate coming in here, but clearly, as we know, a restaurant use could be a use in the BF2 in that retail building.
Correct, and if it comes in, it would require special scrutiny as part of the conditional use permit process, whereas the retail which is proposed would typically be allowed as of right and wouldn't require any scrutiny by any of the town boards. So to that extent, there would have to be further analysis of what the impact would be for a special permit use that would have that degree of higher intensity.
Okay.
So the trip generation we're looking at in the simulation is based upon specialty retail back here, not banks, not restaurants. So
Correct.
If banks or restaurants were proposed back there, that would,
But again, you'd have
whole
to,
different-
you'd be subject to a whole new analysis with a whole new trip generations, with a whole new traffic study and that entire process if you were to go there. But correct, it's, the trip generations are based on the specialty retail and the inflated grocery trip generations.
And in terms of the bank, the likelihood of a new bank going in without a drive-through, which is not really incorporated in this, is very unlikely. And same with that chicken kind of place that the supervisor mentioned down, perhaps at Clover Commons. There are certain uses that will likely require a drive-through, and that would change the dynamic completely and would require much fuller analysis before those went forward.
Just to make sure we've covered this completely, and maybe I'm going over this more than is needed, but so the trip generation or the traffic counts that were calculated are, you've told us, based in part on a study of the Connecticut Whole Foods store and other similar types of data for similar grocery stores. Were the traffic counts then increased to account for a drive-through Starbucks like would be proposed for this site, or the other particular uses that are being proposed for this particular site?
Yeah, and just to be perfectly clear, you know, we didn't develop the trip generations based on a similar use. We simply used that similar use to verify that at very least we were being conservative. But yes, the way in which that, you know, there is a very specific use that is targeted for Starbucks and Tim Hortons and Dunkin' Donuts, which is what we use for the trip generation. So it is very specific to that kind of small 2,000 square foot, high turnover, drive-through, crank them through traffic, which is what we used.
The Darien example was used, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Darien example was used to show that the actual trips were less than ITE, but for purposes of our analysis, we did use the ITE numbers, and that's why we are conservative. So the numbers which were used weren't based on Darien. Darien was used as an example that ITE skews a little bit higher than what we anticipate actual to be for a Whole Foods location.
Yeah, and I appreciated that, the Darien, because it was at least a response on your part to a concern I had raised regarding whether the ITE numbers could be expected to be realistic given what you had found vis-a-vis Wegmans and Tops respectively. So that was, you know, it was certainly a relevant response.
Correct.
And in counting the number, from what I can see, I can't see a thing because of this light in my eyes. That's why I keep putting my hand up here. In my count, I have that there's about 145 parking spaces. Is that going to be enough for a 55, for the size of the Whole Foods you want?
Where in the front?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, Whole Foods, as part of their lease agreement, is very specific with not only the amount of spaces that they require, but also of the location of those spaces based on all their experience. So this has been laid out to satisfy those requirements to meet their needs, which they are very fully aware of.
And to satisfy the provisions of the Town of Brighton Code.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And then just to go back and circle back, as Amy was just pointing out, you know, this little box here, for example, during the AM peak hour generates 100 trips. So, you know, that's more than one a minute. So it absolutely is consistent with what a Starbucks would do.
As far as the ITEs are concerned, I mean, I understand how you generated the trip counts for the Whole Foods, but as far as for quote-unquote specialty retail, it encompasses so many different things. I mean, I understand a restaurant maybe generating more trips at night, a Starbucks maybe generating more trips in the morning, but now this amorphous concept of a specialty retail. Is it men's clothing? Is it office supplies? Is it, how do we pick a number in order to make sure that the numbers that we're using for this analysis are in the ballpark?
Yeah, I mean, and the answer is yes, it really is all of those things. It's the, you know, typical type of things that you would find in the plaza, not unlike what you have in the Pittsford Plaza here. You know, once you get further east of Wegmans, you know, there's a wide array of different types of uses, but at the end of the day, they all have similar operating hours. They all have similar amount of turnover. You know, they're all selling certain products, you know, where they're selling products. They're not selling food. They're not selling groceries. whether it's the ski company or whether they're selling computers or Verizon or whatever have. It really is all encompassing of all those, and the way that they generate the rate is really by looking at plazas that have a lot of those types of uses. And they tend to be very consistent.
Do my colleagues on the board have any additional questions? I do want to note Jim Vogel, Councilmember Vogel, could not be here. Jim is out of town. He did have the opportunity to review, to view actually a similar presentation to see how the simulation would work. So I just wanted to make sure people knew that Councilmember Vogel has, although he's not here, has in general terms viewed this simulation model and had an opportunity to ask questions at that time. Again, are there any other questions from my colleagues on the board or comments or issues that either Stantec or town staff want to address at this time? I do want to make sure everybody again knows next Wednesday night, May 10th, the public will have an opportunity in a formal public hearing to review not only the traffic issues, but also the entire supplemental draft environmental impact statement. That document is on the town's website. If you go to the section on the town's website entitled Private Developments or Private Development Projects, I can't remember exactly how it's identified, but under that you will see several projects, including this proposed project, and clicking there will get you to the supplemental draft environmental impact statement. If there are no further questions from the board, I certainly anticipate that there will be questions from the board as well as from the public at the public hearing at that time. But there is, that's the only item we have on our agenda tonight for the workshop. I want to thank the members of the public that were here, whether you were here watching us in person or those of you that watch this remotely or subsequently on our YouTube channel. I want to thank the applicant and council and your engineering team for being here tonight, and I want to thank our own staff who is here tonight.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss, Mr. Supervisor, if I could not to thank
Yeah,
you.
and I was going to give you the opportunity as well, if you had anything more that you wanted to say.
No, we
adjourn.
won't make it long. I know we'll have a long meeting next Wednesday, but I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of our team and my family to thank you for this opportunity. I know, the last public hearing was a little frustrating because we didn't have this opportunity, and so I appreciate it. We look forward to the public comment that will inevitably come next week, and we appreciate the opportunity, and I also would like to thank Mr. Del Monte, who handled the audio-visual tonight, because this was no small feat from a technological standpoint. So thank you for putting this together as a town board, and your staff did a wonderful job. So thank you.
Thank you for thanking
Thank
Steve
you
Del
for
Monte.
thanking me
We
for
always,
thanking
yeah, but we do, because we do appreciate the
Oh,
work that our video team puts in. There being no further business, unless anybody wants to jump in, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Dan, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Novros?
Aye.
I broke something.
Aye, aye.
Councilmember DePonzio?
Aye.
Councilmember Werner?
Aye.
Supervisor Maley?
Aye, thank you very much. And again, the town board's next meeting will be May 10th at 7 p.m. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Good.